Hi, um, I'm Sherry Jones, and I'm here to tell you why I write. Why are you a writer is probably one of the most frequent questions I get from readers. And it's also one of the most difficult for me to answer because writing feels as much a part of who I am as breathing, or as taking long walks, or loving to read, or playing the piano, or or as being as much as being a good cook. And I am a fabulous cook, by the way. But anyway, when I think about how I became a writer or why I write, I can only really look back through my life and arrive at one answer, and that is that I had a really shitty childhood. Now, this is really true. I mean, my childhood was miserable. I had two abusive parents. I don't mean to complain. You know, they say that no writer ever had a happy childhood. I actually looked that up, and I'm not sure who said it, so maybe I'm the one who said it. But I definitely had a pretty bad childhood. And I think as a result, I went to escape a lot from that misery and suffering. And reading was a great escape for me. So was writing. So I think about when I was a child, you know, my life wasn't all bad. I had some bright moments. I spent time on my mother's knee when I was 4 years old, learning to read. She would read to me and follow along on the pages of the books with her finger, and following along the words as I read. And I somehow learned to read that way. She asked me if I could read the words, and I could. So that got me off to a great start in terms of loving books, and my mother was always very supportive of my love for books. When I was in the first grade, I won a writing contest for who could read the most books. I was very competitive in school, and so I won the contest, and the prize from my first grade teacher was a box of used books, and it was gift wrapped, and I opened it up, and it was like a treasure chest to open up and to see all these wonderful books. And I remember one of them was Little Women, and I was so excited to read this book again and again. I must have read it 10 times that summer. And you know, what girl who reads Little Women doesn't identify with Jo? I mean, Jo, the writer, the strong, tomboyish woman or girl, she was all the things that I wanted to be. And so I think that maybe sharing in her writing successes and seeing her go up to the, you know, her studio or her office or whatever she used, her desk, and write plays and stories, it got me to do the same. I remember when I was in junior high school, one of my best girlfriends, Kelly Cotterman, and I would write funny plays, going back and forth, making fun, secretly fun of all our classmates. If you've ever seen that 80s TV show Square Pegs, which I loved, but it was starring Sarah Jessica Parker, in fact, but it didn't last very long. It was, Kelly and I were like that. We were like those two nerdy girls in Square Pegs, secretly making fun of everybody else who thought they were cool. So I also remember another big influence on me to become a writer was my second grade reading teacher. And I don't remember her name, I'm ashamed to say. I've actually tried to find her online. I went to Holloman Air Force Base Elementary School in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And my second grade reading teacher was only my reading teacher. She wasn't my main teacher. So I never got to, like, her picture isn't with the, you know, class in the group photo. So I don't remember her name, but I remember that she was this very supportive, African-American, kind woman. I'm saying that in case anybody knows her. Send her to me. She used to say to me, I mean, one time she said to me in front of the whole class, she was would always praise the poems I wrote and the stories I wrote. And she said to me in front of the whole class, if you're ever a writer, if you grow up to be a writer, please keep your maiden name so that I'll know it was you. And by default, I do still have the same name that I was born with. So, you know, send her my way. So anyway, then I think about when I was in high school, you know, one of the great sources of comfort for me were my diaries and journals. And it's interesting, when I've still got some of those old journals, including, did any of you ever have like one of those 5-year diaries where you had about this much space for each day of the year to make your entry? And I would write things like, you know, came home, you know, had supper, went to bed. Or I would say, you know, talk about some friend I was having a fight with, or some boy that I liked. But I didn't really write about my parents for some reason. And I think that maybe I just didn't want to dwell on that, or I wrote to escape from those problems, not really to deal with them. Maybe being so young, I didn't really know how to deal with those kinds of abuses that I suffered in my life. So, thank you for all the hearts, by the way. That's really sweet. That's a great feature of Periscope. So anyway, so I would do all this writing, and thank you. I do all this writing and escaping from my life, and then I read everything I could get my hands on. You know, as a child, I read the Trixie Belden mystery series, the whole series. I was always very goal-oriented, so I had to read the whole series of everything. I read all the Little House books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And I loved Ray Bradbury, and just loved Dandelion Wine was one of my favorite books. So, and I always wanted to be a writer. I mean, I knew from a young age, when my second grade teacher suggested it, maybe she planted the idea in my head, but I always knew that I wanted to write fiction. But, you know, I really had no idea how to go about it. It wasn't until much later in life, when I was around 41 years old, that I actually found a heroine that captured my fancy so much that I wanted to write about her. That was Aisha, the youngest wife of the Prophet Muhammad, who I had read about when I was reading about women in Islam after September 11th. I really wanted to learn more about the situation for women under the Taliban in Afghanistan. And these books I read talked about Aisha, this amazing woman who married the Prophet Muhammad supposedly at a very young age as a child, as a political alliance, because her father was Muhammad's best friend. And she grew up to become this, like, the most famous and influential woman in Islam. She was really intelligent, very strong, very outspoken, even with Muhammad. And she went on to lead troops in the first Islamic Civil War. She also had a great sense of humor, which I totally appreciate. And just was so captured by her. The more I read about her, the more time I wanted to spend with her. And so I ended up writing The Jewel of Medina about her, and that was my first novel. And fortunately, you know, I worked on that for 5 years between the research, the writing. I went through 3 freelance editors. Luckily had a husband at the time who was happy to pay for all that editing, and I got an agent, and the rest is history. But I know that you know, when it comes right down to why I write, why do I tell all of these stories about these other really kick-ass women in history? I think maybe the same thing applies today as applied when I was a child, going up to write in my journals about everything else except really myself. And I think that maybe I'm doing that as well now. I'm writing all these other stories of these other women, maybe partly to process or bring my own self, explore my own self and my own beliefs and feelings and thoughts, but maybe also it's kind of an attempt to escape from my own life and my own memories and my own self. I remember growing up as an Air Force brat It was really hard to move around from place to place, to leave my friends behind each time, and to have to leave behind a place that maybe I had grown attached to, a school that I had become attached to, everything that I knew except for my family, and to go somewhere else. And I remember my mother saying to me, you know, really, nobody can ever take, the one thing nobody can ever take away from you is your memories and your experiences. And I believe, I still remember that. It made a big impact on me. It helped me to cope with moving around. I became an optimistic person, like, oh, I'm having all these great new experiences. And I know that my stories, too, are made up of all those experiences that I've had in my life. And I think that maybe that's what I'm doing now as I write. Someday those memories will disappear. At the very least, when I do, someday my memory might go, my experiences might fade away, or they might be gone. And so I feel like I'm writing now as fast as I can to get all that down before it's gone, before I'm gone, so that my stories can maybe live on after me. And so that is why I write. Thanks for joining me.